So I've been getting quite a few questions regarding my latest KSP movie, Into the Warp, specifically regarding the craft that features very heavily throughout the movie and is the focal point of the video's thumbnail, the interplanetary SSTO that Jeb flies to the alien star system. A lot of people have wondered if the craft actually works without cheat codes or hacks, with some purporting that there's no way it works in the stock game. Well, today in this video, I want to put any ambiguity to rest, and I've always wanted to kind of showcase this craft anyway, since I'm really proud of how it came out. So that's what we're going to do in this video. We're just going to explore the Into the Warp SSTO. If you've not seen Into the Warp, then you can click on that link in the top right hand corner of your screen or in the description. But I think that's enough time dedicated to the intro. Let's unpack this sucker and take a look at it in the Spaceplane hangar. There it is. It's called Rescue Plane. So there it is there. So we can open up that cargo bay and take a look at what's inside. We've got our science lab there so that the Kerbals could do lots of science to learn more about this new star system that was featured in the film. We've also got a drill and indeed a convertitron unit so that we can synthesize more fuel, etc., to enable this thing to have a theoretically infinite range, provided it can find more refueling points. We also have main crew capacity for 20 Kerbals, if we include the 4 Kerbals in the cockpit there. And we've got lots of landing gear as well. Those 2 posterior landing gear segments that are on the tips of the wings are only there to help with landing and just traveling along surfaces. They're not designed to be deployed during takeoff because they do prevent this thing from nosing up. Anyway, we can just cut across to our launch, and we're going to set the refueling station as our target because unfortunately this thing doesn't have enough delta V to get anywhere beyond low Kerbin orbit. So in this mission, and like we did in the film, we're gonna have to dock it first to a refueling station that is in low Kerbin orbit, just like we did in Into the Warp, and it's gonna be the same space station that featured in Into the Warp as well. So we're kind of retracing the plot, or at least the path that this plane took in the film. So without further ado, we can fire up those Rapier engines, enable SAS and start throttling up. You can also see that I stowed away those 2 rear landing wheels because, again, they prevent us from pitching up when it comes to actually taking off. So yeah, fairly slow takeoff at first. I'm not even going to bother start pitching up till we're going a lot faster because this thing does have a fairly hefty dry mass. As you can see, it doesn't have all of its oxidizer. It is a bit sluggish when fully laden with oxidizer, and it does have way more oxidizer storage than it really needs because I wasn't sure how much closed cycle burning it would require in the film. And the Kerbals were designing this thing from the ground up as an intergalactic or interstellar at the very least SSTO. They didn't know what kind of climates it would need to be flying through. There might not have been oxygenated atmospheres. It would have needed to rely on the closed cycle mode of those Rapiers a little bit more than it would end up needing to. So it's nice to have that extra oxidizer storage. So first thing we're going to do is, like most of my SSTO flights, we're going to fly fairly flat at relatively close to sea level just to gain as much speed as we can. Crucially though, we're aiming to get up to about 450 meters per second, at which point we'll have broken through the drag created at traveling around the Mach 1 barrier, at which point the Rapiers will unlock their full thrust capabilities. And as you can see, our surface speed starts rocketing up at a very rapid rate. So now we're going to gradually begin pitching up. Our next step of the ascent is to gain a little bit of altitude, and we're going to start flying a little bit flatter once we reach 10 kilometers because, again, we want to get as much speed as possible on the air breathing mode of the Rapiers because they are far more efficient in this mode. They're even more efficient than those 4 nuclear engines as well. So we want to get the bulk of our ascent speed, as in the acceleration needed to reach stable orbit, done in the atmosphere with the air breathing mode of those Rapier engines. Now we're in the thinner atmosphere where there is less air resistance, we can really begin to accelerate. So I'm flattening out to almost level flight, sticking very close to that prograde marker just to get as much speed out of those Rapiers before they end up being a bit too oxygen deprived to provide any more meaningful acceleration. So we're just keeping an eye on that altitude gauge. Those Rapiers are going to start struggling for air at just after the 20 kilometer mark. So around that point, we're going to fire up the nuclear engines, which are now high enough up to provide actual thrust. When you fire nuclear engines very low in the atmosphere, they're very inefficient and they don't provide very high thrust. And there they are, firing there. And as you can see, our surface velocity is still increasing, so we don't need to switch the Rapiers to closed cycle mode just yet. But now we really are crawling along. We're not gaining much more speed. So in just a second, we're going to hit action group 2. There we are, and that switches the Rapier engines into closed cycle mode. So now they're burning through our oxidizer supplies at a very rapid rate. They are very inefficient in this mode, but it's needed in order to reach orbit, and it's still more efficient than, say, having a bunch of exclusively air-breathing engines and then a bunch of exclusively, chemical rocket engines. Although the Rapier engines are not very efficient, this is the way to go for making SSTOs. It's more efficient to have just the one engine that could do the closed cycle burn and the air-breathing burn, rather than having a set of jet engines and then a separate set of rocket engines for the, I guess, higher parts of the atmosphere flight. That was a well-constructed sentence, I think. Anyway, as you can see, our atmospheric flight is coming to an end. Our apoapsis height is just about at 80 kilometers at the moment, so well out of the atmosphere. But I'm going to continue burning along this path a little bit longer because we want our apoapsis to be about the same height as our space station, which is currently orbiting at about 110 kilometers above the surface of Kerbin. So there's our apoapsis marker passing the 100-kilometer mark, and as you can see, we're getting a pretty close separation. That's almost a direct ascent rendezvous right off the bat without any adjustments needed. It's just a 3.4 kilometer separation, which in terms of Kerbin orbit is very, very close. However, I kind of wanted to get things to dock on the light side of the planet just because, A, that's more akin to what happened in Into the Warp, but more crucially, if it's docking on the light side of the planet, it means it's easier for you guys to see what's going on. Kerbal Space Program on the night side of planets is fittingly quite dark, and YouTube's video compression bots, when you upload a video, they generally make videos look a lot darker. I like doing as much as I can on the light side of planets just to make it easier to see exactly what's going on. So I'm going to aim for those purple separation nodes there rather than the orange ones, because those are happening on the second half of our orbit, which is on the light side of the planet. So I'm just playing around with the maneuver node maker now, trying to get those nodes to come as close as possible. I think I started modifying it and then I whizzed past the maneuver node maker, so I had to quickly cancel it and make another one a bit further ahead of our SSTO, but those are the separation nodes coming together nicely. I couldn't get it much closer than 1.2 kilometers, so I thought, you know what, let's just do that. And then once we've got our closer encounter sorted, we can then make another maneuver node and try and edge it to be a little bit closer, nearer to the encounter point. And that is pretty much what I'm doing now. I've created this maneuver node about 15 minutes before the encounter on the clock face. I'm not doing anything fancy, I'm just playing around with the various nodes on the maneuver node maker, trying to get those separation indicators as close as possible. I started out with retrograde and prograde, now we're just playing around with the inclination markers, the normal and anti-normal pink triangle nodes, and I'm just trying to edge that separation to be as small as possible. So now I've got it down to just 300 meters, which is pretty accurate considering the size of both of these crafts, and the actual separation indicators, they're not completely one-to-one accurate. So overall, I was happy with having that as my starting point. What we'll do is we'll just warp around to that close approach, kill off all of our speed relative to our target, and then just burn directly at the target on the nav ball from that point, and we should get a fairly easy 0 kilometer separation encounter in relatively short time. So first of all, we're just slowing ourselves down relative to our target by switching our nav ball into target mode and burning along the retrograde marker. 0.3 meters per second, I'd say that's pretty much stopped. And then you can see I'm just pointing straight at the target on the nav ball, and those nodes swung around into a 0 kilometer separation in very, very short amount of time. And just quickly tabbed out of the map screen. You can see we came a little bit too close for comfort, but it was fine, doesn't matter too much. And there it is, the space station that was shown in Into the Warp. Now, I'm not going to lie to you guys. First of all, I'm really proud of this station. I think it looks really cool, and it is believably constructed. Like, all of the sticky outy bits are all attached via docking nodes. This thing could very easily be built with conventional rockets. It doesn't need any kind of ludicrous fairings or terrible contraptions that look very, very unrealistic. Although that being said, I didn't actually build it legitimately. I just built it as one big chunk and then cheated it into orbit, because really the focus of the movie was not this space station. This was just serving as a prop just to refuel the spacecraft. So I didn't really feel it was necessary to do that authentically, because it wouldn't have made it into the final cut of the film. So at that point, it would just be a wasted effort to put this thing into orbit legitimately. But regardless, I am proud of the design of this station nonetheless. And in fact, we've got those 2 escape pods just there. A nice little feature that I'm proud of. Basically, the space station itself has a crew capacity for 6 Kerbals. I think that's realistic number of Kerbals that this thing could support as a maximum. I think in a normal mission it would only have about 4 Kerbals, maybe 5. 6 seems like it'd be a bit of a stretch, but maybe there might be special missions or diplomatic missions in which, you know, we can showcase 6 Kerbals living in harmony on this ship. And those escape pods, they've got 3 seats each, 6 in total, so they are realistic. They could evacuate the entire space station, and they're self-powered and they can land themselves. So it's just another little feature that kind of makes this space station look a little bit more legitimate. Now you can see me very awkwardly docking the Spaceplane to that port just there, and you can see it uses that shielded docking port, which I love. My only gripe with the shielded docking port, and it's not really a problem with how it functions or anything like that, it's a shame that you can't build with it in the Spaceplane hangar or vehicle assembly building. Like, you can, but then you can't open it in the vehicle editor and then attach things to the docking port of the shielded docking port. Like, you can only really have it on the end of something like a nose cone and then have it dock to things once the craft is launched, which is a shame, you know, because it would be nice to be able to build, I don't know, orbital insertion rockets where they deploy a cargo and then the docking port closes and then the ship goes back and lands, rather than just having a bare exposed docking port on the nose. I don't know, it would just be nice to have a node that you can attach stuff to with that shielded docking port when editing vehicles, but it's a fairly minor gripe and it very rarely ends up giving me any grief, so I don't have to dwell on it too much. Anyway, this was a real gripe that happened. As you can see, I was initially successful in refueling this craft using the fuel tanks on board the space station, but then everything just suddenly stopped working. Like, I couldn't... Look here, I'm trying. I'm pressing in on that fuel tank and it's not transferring to the Spaceplane. I wasn't quite sure why. Like, is it that they can't transfer through a certain number of docking ports, but then the actual fuel tank that the Spaceplane is immediately attached to couldn't transfer fuel either? So I'm not quite sure what happened. To further add to the mystery, quick saving and then reloading that quick save fixed the problem temporarily. And it was, as you can see, there's so many little fuel tanks on that Spaceplane, and it became such a hassle to have to keep on quick saving, keep on quick loading, and then eventually I just said, you know what, enough. Okay, it's fine. I've proven that this refueling station works. I've proven the Spaceplane works. I'm just going to save myself some years on my life and just use HyperEdit to refuel it. And in my haste, I made a bit of a blunder. And no, this isn't like a surprise Blunderbirds episode or anything. There's no... On a lonely planet, slowly spinning its... Yeah, there's none of that. I was just saying that I made a bit of a mistake. I filled up the oxidizer tanks on the Spaceplane, which I shouldn't have done, because A, that adds a huge amount of dry mass when now we only really need to be using the nuclear engines, which don't rely on oxidizer. But when it comes to doing our final Kerbin reentry, we're going to have very little liquid fuel, but lots and lots of oxidizer. And that means that the craft is not very well balanced for atmospheric flight, and it will stall and go into a flat spin, and it won't fly very well. So, I had to come up with a solution for this problem, and I didn't have a fuel valve on this SSTO either before someone says that in the comments. So you'll just have to wait and see what the solution to that little puzzle was. I mean, it's not that difficult to think of how I might get around that problem when you think about it, but I'm going to keep you in suspense anyway in case some of you still can't figure it out. Hopefully you all managed to figure out what I'm doing here, and that is getting an encounter with Juna. Yes, I forgot to launch at a transfer window for the red planet, so I had to quickly go to the tracking station and just time warp around until such a point where Juna was in a good spot to get an encounter from Kerbin, which, as you all know by now, if you draw a line from Kerbin to the sun to Juna, to get an optimal Juna transfer, the angle that forms at the sun should be about 45 degrees, and there we are. 1,161.2 meters per second is all it's going to take to get us to Juna, but I don't know if you saw me trying to get an encounter with a ship orbiting Juna. That's right, one of the, the main sort of catalyst that got the whole of the Into the Warp story going was the fact that there was a mysterious derelict alien vessel floating around Juna. So that's what we're going to showcase next, because some people were wondering, what is that craft? How is it there? What is frogs? What are frogs? Who knows? But that's not important right now. We're going to get an encounter with it. I'm going to show you guys that ship up close and personal, because it's got a few interesting little quirks that you might not have known about. And yes, it's going to be really fun. It's going to be really fun. I really hope you enjoy my video, guys. If you're enjoying it so far, why not leave a little like down there? Anyway, Here you can see me on the map screen now, just adjusting our encounter with Juna, making it a little bit more optimal for getting an equatorial orbit. As you can see, we've managed to get a cheeky Ike assist as well, which is unsurprising. It's very common to get Ike assists as you enter Juna's sphere of influence, because Ike has a fairly large gravity well compared to Juna, so it's very easy to get encounters with Ike, which makes things like constructing space stations and having satellites orbiting Juna potentially a little bit precarious, because it's very easy to get them a little bit too high up and a bit too close to the range of Ike's sphere of influence, and it will just yeet it either off into deep space or straight into Juna, or indeed, you might just smash straight into the surface of Ike as well. So you've got to be very careful when placing things in high Juna orbit. I certainly had to be careful when placing the alien ship in orbit, but luckily it's in a sweet spot where it's just a bit too low to be influenced by Ike's gravity. So yeah, I'm not going to be doing any aero braking or, gravity assists to get ourselves into Juna orbit. We're going to be doing it all on engines, because this SSTO has more than enough delta V, despite the fact I packed it with so much unnecessary weight in the form of oxidizer. It's got more than enough delta V to do all the stuff it needs to do on engine. So I'm basically making sure our orbital line intersects the orbital line of the black ship that we need to dock to, and then we can create a maneuver node at that point and just drag on the retrograde marker until we get a close encounter with the alien ship. So now we have entered Juna's sphere of influence. We have nothing more left to do other than warp down to our maneuver node and I guess commence our burn. Oh, and there's Ike, and we like Ike here at Lowne Aerospace. Although it wasn't that helpful here, I believe that it did actually end up causing us to have to spend a little bit more fuel to get our desired Juna encounter, because it threw us off course a little bit. But it wasn't too much, so we'll forgive it this one time. Yes, there's not much more. I'm stalling for time, I'm not going to lie to you, but I'm not sure why I haven't commenced this burn just yet. Oh, well, I spoke too soon. We have now... I sped the footage up quite a bit, so the burn was over in no time at all, although it was quite a while for me playing this game. Relatively. I mean, it wasn't ultimately that long, right? It wasn't like... It didn't take like 3 days, but, I had enough time to have a little sip of my Diet Pepsi. I've got Diet Pepsi this week, guys. I normally get Pepsi Max. I'm a bit of a fan of the Pepsi Max, but I ordered it from like Sainsbury's online shopping. Sainsbury's is a supermarket here in the United Kingdom for my American viewers out there, or any other country that doesn't have Sainsbury's, which I think is all countries that isn't in the United Kingdom and Ireland. But, for whatever reason, they didn't have any Pepsi Max in stock. And when this happens, they usually just substitute it. And in this case, they substituted my 24-pack of Pepsi Max with a regular old Diet Pepsi. But you know what? I'm liking it. It's a nice, refreshing drink. I'm having a little sip. Just keeps me nice and hydrated, nice and buzzed a little bit, because there's a little bit of caffeine in it as well. It's a great drink. Overall, on my Pepsi brand review series, I would give Diet Pepsi a 7.5 out of 10. That's my new thing on this channel. We're reviewing flavors of Pepsi, it would seem. Anyway, we're here now, by the way. I've now got stuff to talk about again. Yeah, see, and actually, we did come very, very close to hitting that ship as we exited the map screen. I've got a bit of a bad habit of doing that, where I get my target approach really, really close and then drop out of the map screen right as we're about to reach that indicator, only to realize that, oh yes, we're actually going to hit it. But luckily, we grazed past this thing by inches, and here we are. Jebediah can bravely go on his EVA, crashing into the highly radioactive warp stone just there. We can do a little tour of this ship, although we did already have a little bit of a tour in the film, so we haven't got to dwell on it too much. We've got these 2 screens just here that I created these myself in Photoshop, so hopefully you like my artistic skills just there, trying to make them look like holograms. Yeah, a little tour of the ship. Jebediah's obviously got to be careful to not bash his head on the floor ceiling. Oh, maybe I spoke too soon, yes. This ship is completely like non-solid. You could just fly through it. That's why in the film I had to be really careful to make sure Valentina, as she was flying through the ship, didn't touch any of the floors or the walls or the ceiling, because she would have just gone straight through it and it would have broken the illusion. It does seem that the floor just in front of the altar here is solid, so I guess it's got that going for it. But not only is this thing not solid, it also doesn't have mass. As you can see, we've got that little probe core underneath the warp stone altar, and this thing turns on a dime. I have not sped the footage up here at all, and that's kind of proven by the fact there's the timer on the top left-hand side of the screen, and you can kind of see Jebediah just drifting at normal speed, and this thing's just spinning around like crazy, and obviously it's got very high thrust-to-weight ratio despite being so massive and only having a spark engine clipped inside it for power. But as you can see, it can spin around pretty wildly. Now, I didn't create this ship myself. I came up with a little texture file for the 3 hologram screens on it, but the model itself was created by Linx, an incredibly talented mod maker and a very gracious gentleman as well. He makes incredible planet packs for Kerbal Space Program, including one called Beyond Home, and Beyond Home is amazing because you know, Kerbal Space Program's got a thing called ground scatter. That's how Kerbin can have trees and stuff. They're called ground scatter. But in stock Kerbal Space Program, this is used for fairly boring stuff like trees, rocks, etc. Linx figured out how to make things like cities and buildings appear on planets. So in his mod pack, Beyond Home, there's a planet with cities on it, and there's a planet with crashed ships as well. And those crashed ships are that black ship there. They are a little bit different to the one that I'm using here. This is a custom kind of version of it. The ones in the mod pack have like writing on them, and it's English writing, and the hologram screens inside are different as well. For Into the Warp, I wanted it to look truly alien and void of all kind of recognizable numbers and letters, so that's why I got rid of all the text on it, but it was all done by Linx, so huge thank you to Linx. I'll put a link to his YouTube channel in the description. There is actually one on my actual YouTube channel homepage in the related channels. I've got it pinned just there. So, you know, if you guys are bored of the stock Kerbal Space Program solar system, I highly recommend Beyond Home. Excellent mod pack. I think it is vastly superior to the stock KSP system. So if you want to revamp your game, then, you know, I recommend that mod pack. So if you've been watching the screen, you may be wondering, what the devil is he doing now? What's he playing at? I've got nothing more to reveal about Into the Warp, to be honest. I'm just going to Ike because although we've got a lot of Delta V, 870 meters per second to be precise, it'd be nice to have a bit more just to make it a bit easier to get back to Kerbin and get back to the runway. It's always nice to have a bit more fuel to play around with, and if we refuel ourselves, then it means we can circularize at Kerbin using engines rather than having to rely on aero brakes, which is a little bit faster to do it with engines rather than having to do multiple passes through the atmosphere to lower our apoapsis down to a good height. So I thought, let's just land at Ike, refuel ourselves, and then we can start heading back to Kerbin. May have noticed there's a nice Ike shadow being cast on Juna just there as we swing around to our landing site, and I got a bit overzealous here. I mean, Ike's got fairly low gravity. It only takes 390 meters per second to come to a stop on its surface, which is you know, a little bit lower than the Mun. The Mun, for comparison, requires 580 meters per second. So in terms of difficulty to land on, Ike sits somewhere between Dres and Bop in terms of its Delta V requirement. So I think in my arrogance, in my overconfidence, I left it a bit too late to start our suicide burn with the nuclear engines. Luckily, as I said before, I did put too much oxidizer in this thing, so we can actually refire those Rapier engines in closed cycle mode, give us a last second boost of thrust, and it prevented us from hitting the ground a bit too hard, and I think that's a 10 out of 10 landing, if I do say so myself. And I've seen many landings in my time, almost 3, so I'm definitely an authority on this subject. And so without further ado, we can begin the mining process. So I can open up the top cargo hatches and then open up the lower cargo hatch to deploy the drill. Obviously on the top, we've deployed that radiator panel as well as the solar panel. This thing doesn't need the solar panel to generate electric charge. It has an RTG inside it, but that solar panel will help buffer our electric supply. And obviously the radiator panel will just prevent things from getting a bit too hot. As you can see, I had to kind of balance time warp in order to make sure the drill would continuously drill without running out of electric charge, and this time warp setting here seemed to do the trick. So once we've got ourselves fully refueled, we can bring that drill back in, retract the radiator panel and the solar panel. Oh, forget to retract the antenna dish as well. We can quickly reopen the hatch and get that closed, and then we can get ready to perform our surface ascent. So, well, actually, before I do that, though, I'm going to quickly refill our monopropellant tanks because I noticed that we'd completely run out of that, and that would be useful for something we're going to be doing later on in the video. But the most pressing issue we need to face at the moment is getting ourselves back into space. Now, I notice I had forgotten to turn off that convertitron just there, and that thing eats electric charge for breakfast. So I'll quickly open the cargo bay door again and just turn that off. Now we can get ready to perform our ascent. So I'm going to retract that rear landing gear because we don't want that deployed for our ascent. We're going to make sure our Rapier engines are in closed cycle mode as well, just in case we need them, which we ended up needing them. And then we can start performing a turn. I decided to perform our ascent along the 90-degree vector on the nav ball, purely because this is the most efficient vector to ascend with, because it goes with the rotation of Ike and every other celestial body in this game, which means that we save a little bit of delta V because we get some acceleration from the actual rotation of the planet. Now, Ike is so small that this delta V saving is admittedly very small, but it's a saving nonetheless, and I guess we don't really need to be that efficient because we've got so much delta V left in our tanks, but sometimes it's nice to just do things in air quotes the correct way. Did get a bit, I just noticed that ridge started getting a little bit close to us, so I had to do a quick radial outburn just to make sure we were definitely going to get clear of that mountain, and it was fine. Nothing to worry about, guys, nothing to worry about. And then we can create a maneuver node at our apoapsis point to get ourselves into a circular orbit so we can begin planning our encounter with Kerbin at a safe altitude. So now left to do before we just commence that burn. There it is. There's the burn there. And yeah, then we can actually get to performing our Kerbin burn. Now, in order to reach Kerbin, we need to lower our orbit around the sun, which we currently can't do from Ike orbit because Ike is in front of Juna. So if we try and reduce our orbit from here, it'll merely send us smashing into the surface of Juna. Instead, we'll time warp around until Ike is behind Juna, and therefore we're behind Juna, and then perform our burn, and that'll get us into a lower orbit around the sun without needing to worry about hitting Juna in the process. There we are. All worked out beautifully. So what I'm doing now is pulling on that prograde marker and spinning the node around a bit till we're getting a nice encounter with Kerbin's orbital line. We're not at a Juna to Kerbin transfer window though, so we're going to have to force it a bit. I'm just going to get our orbital line around the sun to intersect Kerbin's orbit at around its periapsis point, and then we can create another maneuver node at that point to force our encounter with Kerbin. We usually have to either drag it out a little bit prograde or a little bit retrograde to force a Kerbin encounter. In this case, I believe I had to drag it out a little bit prograde, which meant our Kerbin encounter would be a little bit faster than it would be otherwise, but it means we could encounter Kerbin a little bit sooner, and it wasn't a huge amount of acceleration, so it didn't really cause us any issues in the long run. Spoiler alert, by the way, for this part of the video, but I guess now you can see this all play out just as I foretold it. So I'm just going to time warp past our periapsis point, and then we can create another maneuver node and drag on that prograde marker, and as you can see, very small burn to get us on a Kerbin encounter with pretty much no effort, like 223 meters per second. So a significant amount if you're doing a skin of the teeth, hyper efficient mission, but this, my friends, is not such a mission. So you can see I'm just playing around with the normal and anti-normal nodes on the maneuver node maker just to get our periapsis around Kerbin as close to the equator as possible. But I want to make sure it's above the atmospheric border because, as I said earlier, I'm not going to be doing any aerobraking to get ourselves circularized around Kerbin. And on top of that, I want to make sure we get another encounter with the space station. And yes, I'm looping back this commentary to the subject that I brought up earlier. I said I made a bit of a blunder when I completely filled up this space plane's oxidizer tanks because I said it doesn't fly very well when it is full of oxidizer. It really isn't designed to fly in Kerbin's atmosphere with full oxidizer tanks. It flies best with virtually no oxidizer at all. That's just how the balancing of the fuel tanks works. So we need somewhere to dump this oxidizer, and I didn't put a fuel valve on this space plane. I didn't really want to use HyperEdit again to empty the fuel tanks, or if I was going to use HyperEdit, I wanted to at least make it so, like, look, I could have done it properly, but the glitch occurred, guys. Spoiler alert. I'm now just sort of getting you guys ready for the fact I am going to use HyperEdit, but I'm going to dock ourselves to the space station and then show you guys that for whatever reason, again, I couldn't transfer the oxidizer of this craft into the oxidizer tanks on the space station, and the space station is designed to have more than enough fuel to fully resupply this space plane. So don't know what it is. Have you guys encountered this glitch? Like, I kind of want to use this video as a call to arms. Like, has anyone, not call to arms, but, you know, like, has anyone actually am I doing something wrong? What did I do wrong? I don't get it. Was I doing anything wrong? Because then when I did a quick save and quick loaded, I then did the same thing again, and then it worked. So I'm not quite sure what was happening. I must admit, it's never happened to me before, and I've done lots of refueling in this game in my years behind the pilot's seat, so I'm not quite sure what happened. So we'll be getting an encounter with the space station anyway, just because I wanted to do it for real, but I guess God had other plans that day, that fateful night. So yeah, just doing a very sloppy job trying to get those encounter nodes as close as possible together. Like, I'm really not doing anything fancy. I'm just creating maneuver nodes and then just messing around with them, trying to get our encounter as close as possible. And then we'll just continually do that over and over again until we get an encounter. I don't worry about getting it as close as like to the nanometer on our first big burn, because this is going to be a very long burn. We haven't got great thrust to weight ratio, and the burn itself is quite big, like over 100 meters per second. So our final orbit is not going to that closely match the orbit that was predicted by our maneuver node, but in some wonderful twist of fate, we ended up on a better encounter than the one that the maneuver node maker predicted. So, don't know. Is there a lesson in this? Who knows? So now we've got a slightly more similar orbit to the one our space station is in. We can try and go for a slightly closer approach than the one we were going for initially, although now I look at the actual predicted delta V of the maneuver node maker. Okay, I take it back. It's still quite a big burn. So again, I'm not going to be too worried about getting this thing dead on. Like, I'm going for a fairly close approach, but I don't need to be bothering for like 0 kilometer separation or anything like that, because you just can't get that level of accuracy with crafts of this TWR and over burns of this length. So just going to try and get nice and close to begin with. And once our orbit is pretty much the same as the space stations, then we can really try and go for that very, very close encounter with the maneuver node maker. And that burn is rapidly coming to an end. My goodness, it's great having post-production fast forwarding, isn't it? I wish the real game could play this quickly. The footage at real-time speed was much more tedious than what you're watching. I think at the moment the footage is playing back at between 2 and 4 times normal speed, depending on how slow whatever was going on screen was taking. So you're welcome there, guys, and obviously an extension of that is don't be disheartened if I'm doing things much faster than you. It's probably because I'm just playing the footage back a lot quicker. And also, I've probably got more hours in this game than you. I've got quite a lot of hours in Kerbal Space Program, so I was terrible at docking. It took me probably like 80 or 90 hours to figure it out myself, so it's very normal to struggle with docking. It took me a very long time. I would say docking is probably the hardest vanilla skill to master in Kerbal Space Program. Like, yeah, you got goals such as an Eve landing is very tough, but an Eve landing is basically just a bigger version of a Juna landing, right? Just a bigger rocket, more boosters. But docking is a fundamentally different process entirely, and it's a very difficult one to get your head around. It doesn't seem that intuitive, but I promise you, once you get it for the first time, something will just click, and it'll get easier and easier from that point on, to the point where you don't even have to think about it. And here we are, docking now. And as you can see, we're now got a very nice close separation as we just burn straight towards our target on our nav ball. We can whittle that down to 0 kilometers in no time at all, even with the even without the post-production acceleration. And once again, I have managed to overshoot that separation node. So I'm going to have to a quick burn back towards the target. I did this earlier as well, so I can mention it again. I kind of got a bit lazy when it came to docking these two craft together. I rotated the space station to line up with the docking port on the space plane, as well as doing all of the alignments with the space plane itself, just to speed things up and to make things a little bit easier, because this space plane turns about as fast as a merry-go-round. It was very, very slow, and I'm like, you know what? I'm going to make things a little bit easy for myself and just use the reaction wheels on the space station to facilitate our docking, make it a little bit more easy. But I guess this part of the video is kind of like a rewind to what we did earlier, so I'm trying to think if there's anything I failed to mention or didn't talk about enough when we docked with this space station for the first time, but I'm not sure if there is. I can see the Kraken did get a bit happy with the space station just there. What I did to make aligning it with the space plane a bit easier was I just set the control point to be the docking port that we're going to be docking to, and that made it easier to line up the space station docking port with the space plane itself. But I think that made it a little bit more Kraken bait-y. So I think having a control point that is so offset from the center of mass or the spine of the space station makes it a little bit wobbly, a little bit Kraken happy. So not quite sure why it started wobbling like that, but it was definitely after I set that docking port as the control point. And yeah, I was going a bit quick towards, I was like, I just want to get this done, I want to get this mission done. And I think I got a bit quick on the old accelerator, and we ended up crashing into the space station a little bit faster than we probably should have done. One thing I have done that you may have not have noticed right away is I've set our Spaceplane's control point to the docking port at the back, and then we're just controlling using J, K, L, I, H, and N, which are the monopropellant controls, so we can perform all of our backwards, forwards, up, down, left, right movements using the RCS blocks rather than having to rely on the nuclear engines. So now begins the tedious process of trying to transfer our oxidizer back into the space station, and as you can see, weren't having it at all. And again, make it a quick save, and quick loading that quick save seemed to fix things, so I have no idea why this was just going wrong all of the time. So in the end, I said, you know what? It's getting late, it's Thursday night, I've got work tomorrow, and then I've got to go and do the commentary for this big long video. My goodness, I had no idea it was going to go on for over 35 minutes. How long have we got left on that Vegas timeline? Best part of 40 minutes. I thought this was going to be like a quick 15-minute video, but we ended up doing so much, guys. We had so much fun together that I lost track of time, and it ended up being a much longer mission than I thought it was going to end up being. But we can waste no more time. We need to get ourselves back to the runway. So I'm just going to warp around. So the actual Kerbin Space Center Peninsula is on the light side of the planet. Just to make, again, I mentioned this earlier, I like to do as much as I can on the light side of planets to keep the video nice and bright, nice and viewable. And also because it's just nicer to fly during the day. We can see the sights. Our passengers can get beautiful panoramic views of the countryside and the mountains of Kerbin. It's just a generally better way of entering the atmosphere all round. You may have noticed I did forget to switch our control point back to our cockpit, so when I started doing our retrograde burn, we did accelerate initially. I had to quickly go back out of the map screen, set our control point as the cockpit, and then do the retrograde burn again, and it worked out pretty well. Actually, as it turned out, it wasn't ideal because it ended up putting our periapsis a little bit too high. We didn't decelerate quickly enough, and we overshot the Kerbin Space Center. But you know, the devs, they got our backs. You know, they knew, hey, that Matt Lowne fella, he never gets his re-entries right, and he always overshoots the Kerbin Space Center. Let's put another runway out at sea. And so we can just go for that one. So we're going to go for the island runway, guys. This was the plan the whole time. We visited so many different destinations. We went to 2 different spacecraft in space. We landed on another celestial body. We can land at a different runway. And I'm just going to backpedal now on everything I just said. And this was the plan the entire time, guys. So we are now on our approach to the island runway. I can just drop the footage down to 1.5 times normal speed. 1.5 just makes it a little bit of a nicer frame rate. We can just touch down, and I was a bit aggressive on the brakes. Deja vu! I've been in this place before, I think, but we came to a pretty rapid stop. I forgot just how powerful I'd set those brakes. I think I set the rear brakes to be at their maximum strength when we landed on Ike, which you don't really want to land with the brakes in that configuration because you'll do an epic skid like that. But maybe I could just pretend that was the plan again. I really should stop digging myself into holes like this. You know what? Forget it. I'm just going to put an end screen on screen. There are things you can watch. The left-hand side will be a link to the Into the Warp full movie, so you can see this craft in its prime, in interstellar travel, warping, all that good stuff. The right-hand side was a video chosen for you by YouTube's recommendation algorithm. It's like auto-generators. I don't know what it is. I don't know how it works. Bye!